before the next presidential election in France in 2017. Many thanks for that, Claire Pride in the newsroom. It's time for the France 24 debate. A lot of UN bashing goes on in this studio. It's a safe sport, but the world body's once again proven that if it didn't exist, that building on First Avenue in New York would have to be invented. Among those converging on the United Nations General Assembly, Iran's new president, who may or may not shake the hand of his U.S. counterpart. It would be a first since 1977. Iran's foreign minister, who we can show you here in the company of his UK counterpart, already has a firm date to sit in on a meeting Thursday with the U.S. Secretary of State over Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Barack Obama making cautious overtures to Iran in his speech before the General Assembly this Tuesday, overtures couched in the context of Syria's civil war and the support both Tehran and Moscow provide to the Assad's government. Could this be the start of the biggest tectonic shift in the region since the 1979 overthrow of the Shah of Iran? Or, as the current sectarian violence in Iraq shows, are ancient divides cast in stone? Today, in the France 24 debate, Iran and the West, could they be reconcilable differences? With us, he was France's ambassador to Iran from 2001 to 2005. François Nicolot of the Middle East Institute. Welcome to the show. From Washington, half Iranian, half Syrian, political scientist Majid Rafizadeh. Welcome as well. And we can welcome back as well Robert Zarate of the Foreign Policy Initiative, who's also in the U.S. Capitol. And she's a former U.S. State Department official, Laurie Dunton. Well, welcome. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. In his speech before the United Nations, Barack Obama fired his strongest shot, not against the bow of Iran, but perhaps that of Russia, which has used its veto power at the Security Council to block action against Bashar al-Assad in Syria.
Now there must be a strong Security Council resolution to verify that the Assad regime is keeping its commitments. And there must be consequences if they fail to do so. If we cannot agree even on this, then it will show that the United Nations is incapable of enforcing the most basic of international laws. On the other hand, if we succeed, it will send a powerful message that the use of chemical weapons has no place in the 21st century.
All right, and much of our discussion is going to be about Iran. That reminder that a lot of the discussion, a lot of the focus since the 21st of August and that attack in the suburbs of Damascus, that chemical weapons attack, has been on Syria. Obama's message there, plainly directed at the Russians.
Well, and a flat-out challenge to anyone who thinks we should get around the Security Council blockage on Syria. I mean, the contentious issue of the last weeks has resulted in this accord on the handover and possible destruction of chemical weapons of the Syrian government, but it doesn't mean everything's firmly agreed yet until we get a strong set of language on verification and consequences. And so the ball is back in the UN court right now. It's hardball. Everybody's playing hardball. The Russians, the Americans, all players on the council. And there was a reason for him to be fierce today.
Robert Zarate, I'm sorry, I've lost count. Is it the fourth or fifth speech now by Barack Obama before the UN General Assembly? And this time he effectively seemed to say, with the statement we just heard, that the UN is not the only game in town should those vetoes continue.
Yes, it's true that the United States can act outside of the United Nations Security Council if the president decides so. However, the president, after making initially a very strong effort to try to get Congress's approval for military force in Syria, has decided, and perhaps unsurprisingly, to go the route of international diplomacy.
Is it a smart move?
It's hotly debated. If the president had really wanted to do punitive strikes in Syria after Assad's repeated uses of chemical weapons, it probably was best not to announce it. It was within his rights to do as commander-in-chief, and he could have, if need be, gone back to Congress and asked for a subsequent authorization of military force. So again, I think there are a lot of problems with the optics here. The United States went into Libya to prevent Gaddafi from doing the very sorts of massacres that we've seen Assad do over the last 2.5 years in Syria.
Majid Rafizadeh, when you roll back the calendar to August 21st and you hear that speech that Barack Obama gave earlier, would you say that he's talked himself out of a corner? Is he a stronger president than he was back then?
Well, I think from the beginning, the United States really didn't want to put itself in this position. I think they were pushed, kicking and screaming into announcing that they will have some limited military strikes, and that was because President Obama already had he specified a red line, and the red line was crossed several times, and U.S. credibility was under question. So I think we have to understand that the core issue is that from the beginning, United States really was not willing to get involved militarily in the conflict. But I think the language of the conflict has changed, and now they're trying to push for a UN security resolution that can solidify and verify the deal that they already made with Russia regarding Syrian the chemical weapons.
François Nicolot, France and the United States, are they in a stronger or weaker position vis-a-vis Syria than they were back a few weeks ago?
Well, it's difficult to say. Frankly, I think the whole story was a success for everybody, including the United States, including France. Now, of course, all depends on the result on the ground, how things will develop on the ground. But frankly, I am optimistic, and I don't think, I beg to dissent, perhaps I don't think the wording of the resolution is so important. What is important is really the will of Assad to implement the agreement, and I believe he will do it. I believe he has no other choice than doing it.
And how much of a player in this is Iran?
In the chemical story, not so big. I mean, Iran was not aware of what was going on. I don't believe Iran has been consulted on the attack, if the attack, as I believe, as has been done by the Assad side. Of course, as you know, for Iran, I mean, the use of chemical weapons is something very sensitive, considering what happened during the Iraq-Iran war. Frankly, I believe that everybody in the Iranian regime is convinced that Assad did it. But of course, they can't admit it. They can't admit it for the moment.
There was even at one point the former president, Rafsanjani, who even made a statement at a rally. There was an audio transcript of it. Then they said he was misinterpreted.
Yes, I mean, Rafsanjani now is an old man, is a bit above, the political fight and so on. So he can speak up the truth. And I believe that he spoke the truth. Then after he had to withdraw it a little bit. But all in all, I mean, the message was very well understood by everybody in Iran.
Majid Rafizadeh, did the use of chemical weapons is that going to alter in any way Tehran's position in its support for Bashar al-Assad?
I don't think so. Before just answering your question, if I can add one thing to the previous comments that your guest made, I think the whole discourse of the Syrian crisis has really shifted. I think that we have to understand that chemical weapons have killed probably less than 1% of the Syrian people. 99% of the Syrian people were killed by the conventional weapons. And I don't think any deal, even if it's reached within the UN General Assembly, which is very unlikely because President Obama is trying to have more bilateral sideline talks with Russia, that even if they reach a deal, it's not going really to change the conflict inside Syria. But Francois, going back to your question about Iran, we have to understand the region from the perspective of the Iranian leader. from the Ayatollahs. What they see is that they see surrounded by U.S. military forces in bases in the region. They're surrounded by Arab countries, which they covertly have or sometimes publicly show that they're not in favor of the political system of Iran, and they have pushed the United States, as WikiLeaks shows, to cut the head of the snake. And the only ally, geopolitical ally they have is Syria. So they're going to fight to the end until they keep the only Arab ally that they have in the region. They have non-state actor ally like Hezbollah, but the only consistent ally they have in the region is Assad. So I don't think even if they reach a resolution and they, let's say, Bashar al-Assad deliver his chemical weapons, that's going really to change Iran's position. Iran's position, an alliance with Syria is really more deep than just having some kind of advanced military technologies or not having those technologies. And I have to say that President Bashar al-Assad has the technology to reproduce this chemical weapon. And Iran has also the technology to transfer it to Syria. And even if he gives up all his chemical weapon, they are capable of creating that chemical weapon in few months. So I don't know really, the discourse has shifted a little bit, and it seems to be diverting from the main issues in the Syria.
All right, and we're gonna obviously pick up on that a little bit later on. But first, let's go to New York. France 24's Douglas Herbert is there covering the UN General Assembly. Doug, when you enter that building, does it feel like a confusing Tower of Babel, or does a day at the UN make you feel like, I don't know, the world's like a smaller, friendlier place?
Definitely not smaller and friendlier. And they're right now actually, and as you said, they're in a temporary building. They're renovating the main General Assembly, so it's not that familiar chamber, that green chamber we're used to seeing. Feels like you're sort of walking into a cafeteria right now, and and half of the speakers are sort of sitting behind columns. They can't even really see who's speaking on the tribune, I imagine. But yeah, I mean, all of that aside, the atmosphere at the General Assembly, being a little different this year, as a lot of this debate's been talking about, the all eyes being on Rouhani and all eyes being on this, the handshake. I mean, I've never heard so much talk on the prospect of a single handshake. I mean, something that, it's not a full meeting. They're not even sitting down around a table. It would just be a handshake. And what's interesting, you hear some stories circulating, old timers here at the UN, who remind people that you had an incident with Khatami, before Ahmadinejad, the last real reformist president of Iran, with Clinton, and they were fated to have a supposed big historic encounter, and it almost happened. It almost came to pass, except that Khatami ducked into the toilet at the last minute. He chickened out. And he chickened out, apparently, François, because he was a little scared of what the hardliners, perhaps at home, the conservative clerical establishment, would think if he were seen to be shaking the hands of, he wasn't really called the Great Satan back then, but of the American president. So yeah, he ducked into the bathroom. There's still dispute to this day. Was he really trying to dodge Clinton, or did he just really have to go? But you're sort of having
I could see, by the way, Doug, while you're speaking, I could see Laurie Dundon nodding. I think they're still smarting at the State Department over that.
I remember there was a lot of back and forth after Khatami's election to say when and where should we engage. I just hadn't thought of it in exactly this context in the restaurant.
So, Doug, about that handshake, if you're a betting man, what would you say? Is it going to happen?
Well, if it's going to happen, it has to obviously happen at this lunch. There's a very closing window of opportunity. It's really one of the only places they're going to be together in a closed room. Otherwise, like you said, this is a very sort of Byzantine, Kafkaesque place, this General Assembly. I mean, it's conceivable that they could sort of, cross paths on sort of the up and down escalator sort of thing and reach out and quickly shake hands there. But no, I mean, there's been a lot of speculation here. Yeah, thinking if it's going to happen, it's going to happen during the lunch. Who's going to orchestrate the handshake? Because in events like this, it doesn't just happen, casually. Everything is orchestrated. There's probably aides on both sides, entire teams of press handlers and presidential aides who are orchestrating this handshake, because it hasn't happened in 30 years. But you want me to get off the fence and be a betting man? They might have a brush by what people call in diplomatic talk. I don't know if that means they're actually going to touch flesh, press the flesh. It'll be a brush by of some kind, and I think we'll get a lot of media hype and hoopla, probably far beyond what any real significance to it is.
All right, and if you want to hedge your bets even further, and I'll put this to Robert Zarate, some are even saying that what could happen is an eye contact, an acknowledgement of each other via eye contact, so they don't have to actually touch flesh. Your thoughts?
Well, my general response to that is I think we're sort of wringing our hands over what I would call photo op foreign policy, when regardless of what happens today between President Obama and President Rouhani, the fact is over the last decade, the United States, the European Union, and other world powers have put on the table numerous proposals to normalize relations with Iran, to provide Iran with energy cooperation, to include nuclear cooperation, a whole host of things, including also provision of air parts. As many people know, Iran still suffers under sanctions, and it's very dangerous to fly on Iranian domestic airlines. So there is a decade's worth of efforts to try to normalize relations if Iran would halt uranium enrichment. And for over a decade,
So are you saying, Robert,
that.
are you saying that same as, that threat of force made Assad acknowledge chemical weapons, that sanctions are helping to concentrate the minds in Tehran?
I think there's a strong evidence that sanctions have hurt the Iranian economy, and in turn, that's changed to some degree the calculus of Iran's leaders. But that said, what we need to look at are the facts on the ground. How much uranium, low-enriched uranium, has Iran produced? How much 20% enriched uranium has Iran produced? How many centrifuges, first-generation, more advanced second-generation centrifuges has Iran manufactured and stood up? These are the real sort of the nitty-gritty, the brass tacks of the situation in Iran. And I think it's very easy to get seduced by the sort of foreign policy photo op that we see going on. But until we actually see actions meet the words, these are just empty words and empty symbols.
All right, we're watching live images as you speak of the that lunch that Douglas Herbert was mentioning a moment ago. Before we go to the break, we haven't seen the handshake yet, but Douglas, again, you were saying it could be a brush by here.
That's what diplomats say, brush by. They use all this sort of arcane language, including bilaterals for, face-to-face meetings between two leaders. I was just going to say on the sanctions issue, the general consensus here is that Iran isn't really, it's no great secret anymore that Iran has openly admitted itself that sanctions have bit its economy. The value of their currency plunging, the unemployment way up, very hard to get a lot of basic goods in the country. That's not the question here. The question is whether or not, they will actually let them, how much that will drive their concessions, the concessions that the U.S. and the European powers say that they're waiting to get. Because Obama's just made clear, Francois, that, they're not going to let the talk go on for talk's sake. There has to be a point at which they actually put stuff on the table.
And we'll be picking up on that point. Douglas Herbert, thanks for joining us from New York. The rest of our panel, stay with us. Much more to come in the France 24 debate.